Hoş geldiniz öncelikle oturuma. Kısa bir bilgi vereyim.
I would like to welcome you to our session. Mr. Öztürk should be the moderator for today, but he has to travel to Uzbekistan, so I'm jumping in for him. So we have guests from abroad, so we will have our session in English. So if you need a translation into Turkish, please get your headphones.
I had to give a brief information in Turkish for our guests. So due to his last minute assignment for another duty, Mr. Öztürk has informed us that he will not be able to attend this session.
Bugün bu oturuma katılamayacağını belirtti. Onun yüzden kendisinin yerine moderasyonu ben üstleneceğim. İsmim Ufuk Yaman. Ben
responsible from Offshore Wind Energy.
Deniz üstü rüzgar enerjisi kurumunun başkan yardımcısı ve Türkiye piyasası hakkında bilgi vermek istiyorum. 2022 yılı içerisinde Türkiye 2035 yılına kadar 5 gigawattlık bir deniz üstü rüzgar enerjisi kapasitesi kurmayı kararlaştırdı ve bununla ilgili olarak da Enerji Bakanlığı bir plan oluşturdu ve
Emirates to invest in offshore wind energy in Turkey. Ministry of Energy signed in September, last or the week before, Ministry of Energy signed a 8 million euro worth grant agreement with the World Bank to be spent for the development of offshore wind zones in Turkey. And again in September, World Bank issued a report called The Role of Concessional Climate Finance in Accelerating the Development of Offshore Wind Energy in Emerging Markets, which includes Turkey as one of the emerging markets. This is important because it justifies providing cheap financing for offshore wind in countries like Turkey, which is crucial. So with our esteemed participants, we would like to explain how it is possible to install 5 gigawatt offshore wind by 2035. In 25th, I think in October, we have released a joint report with Shura advising the authorities about the criteria of an ideal auction mechanism. And I would like to start with Alkım Bağgüllü, and ask what is the importance of offshore wind energy auction design in terms of international practices, and what are the main problems and good practices. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to everyone attending this panel. It's late, it's evening, everybody is tired. So yes, as Shura Energy Transition Center, together with Turkish Wind Energy Council, we have just published a report on the auction design, which we believe is really important for Turkey, because auctions are the only mechanisms in Turkey for the assignment of wind and solar capacity, and we know that the Ministry of Energy is also now working on an auction mechanism for the offshore capacity that is targeted as 5 gigawatt by 2035. So when we are talking about auctions, usually there is the success of these auctions are considered based on the capacities allocated with the lowest prices possible. But another important factor, maybe more important than this, is the realization of a rate of the assigned capacities. Whether these projects that are assigned through these auctions came to life, whether they are taken into operations. So the design of the auction in this sense is very important to eliminate the risks that is posed by the investment environment for the specific country conditions, for the profile of the investors, for project development risks. So let me show you a slide. So this is showing the allocated capacity versus operational capacity by tenders in Turkey. These are wind and solar auctions that took place in Turkey. So all the capacity for those projects are assigned through auctions since 2011. And since 2017, YEKA auctions, renewable energy resource area auctions, are the only mechanism actually to allocate these tenders. So you can see that Turkey, it's true that Turkey has actually come to an important point in terms of increasing its renewable power. Today, 43% of our electricity generation is coming from renewable energy, but you can see here that actually the realization rate of these projects are not as good as we desired, actually. It can be better, especially now when Turkey has declared a net zero target. Now we're entering into a period where our investment speed should accelerate, double or even triple for wind and solar energy. This is even more important. So when we assess why we cannot actually realize these projects, there are some main risks. Some of them are specific to the Turkish investment environment, such as the exchange rate and inflation risk. But also we see that there are some projects which are not taken into operation because they are not well developed. There are some problems in the measurements. There are some problems in the administrative analysis, so they have problems in getting their permits. Another important factor that we have observed is that the profile of the investors. So some of these projects couldn't be taken under operation because the investors who won these tenders actually did not have the adequate, sufficient technical and financial capacity. So that's why I think there are some areas which can be actually improved through designing auctions. And this is even more important for offshore auctions because offshore auctions require higher engineering skills, more financial capability, more complex compared to the offshore wind farms. So that's why we just prepared this report and we analyzed some international examples, many countries, but more deeply the examples of United Kingdom, Denmark, Netherlands, France, and Japan. So the main criteria for offshore wind energy auctions are actually, so these auctions should ensure that the investors that are getting these capacities have sufficient technical capability and experience, and also sufficient financial power. It is also important for these projects to be environmentally and socially compliant, so that this is important for the environment, but also this is important for accessing finance, international finance, which is very important for the Turkish projects. Technological suitability is really important. So the technology that is required should be up to date and should be cost effective. If the project period, if the development period takes a long time, then the technology might be outdated, may not be cost effective. So this brings us to the issue of permits. So permit processes, the period of permits will also be very important for the success of these auctions. And finally, these projects should generate the energy capacity that is targeted. These are the main criteria. So when we check the international examples, there are some main problems actually in the auctions abroad. So one is regulatory uncertainty. So all the regulations for offshore wind parks should be clear and set before the auction. This is important. We saw that there were some problems regarding unclarity in the definition of land use rights of the seas, Long permit periods is another example, especially regarding the environmental impact assessment. In some countries like Japan, it takes more than 4 years for these permits to come. And finally, a very important issue is the definition of the auction prices, the PPA prices, in line with the latest cost updates. We saw that actually between 2010 and 2022, the LCOE of the offshore wind farms decreased by 59% thanks to technological developments and also as a result of the increasing maturity of the industry. But for the last 2 years, in 2021 and 2022, we see some cost increases, especially for the projects in Europe. An increase of LCOE by 18%, which is resulting from the problems of commodity prices after the pandemic. Because of now there is an increasing number of projects in deeper waters, and they are also far away from the shore, so the cost is increasing. Project development and engineering of these complex projects are also more expensive. So that's why, as a result of all these factors, the costs have increased slightly for the European projects. And what we have seen is that in the countries where these cost updates are not taken into consideration for defining, for instance, the ceiling price of the auction, there are some problems. There are some examples in the United Kingdom. We see that some of the auctions which without adequate cost updates didn't receive any applications. And indexation of these PPA prices is another problem. It should be in line with the inflation on the one hand, but also it's important to index them with these rising commodity prices. Of course, there are also some best practices. So what are the good practices in the international experiences? So we see that most of the auctions have some pre-qualification criteria in terms of defining the technical and economic competence of the investors, or sometimes there are some multi-criteria auctions, so the price is not the only criteria. This is very important. So in many countries, we see that MET, ocean analysis, seabed surveys, environmental impact assessments is actually provided by the public authorities to reduce the risk of the investors. For the seabed use rights, we see in some countries they are assigned through tenders, separate tenders, or sometimes they are assigned free of charge by the authorities. PPA definition, PPA indexation in line with the recent cost updates is very important. And in terms of grid connection, in many countries, the public authority, the system operator is undertaking this to reduce the risks of the project developers. And finally, efficient use of penalties are also very, very important. So these can include the liquidation of the bid bonds or reducing the support price, or to ban these investors from future tenders for a certain period of time. All of them are helping to increase the risk of the realization of these projects. So sorry if it took so long, but I will stop here.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed it a lot. Yes, to create an offshore wind supply chain, we need to provide a sustainable pipeline. And this is only possible with the right auction design. This is even more obvious now after the cancellation of some projects in the States. So thank you for providing information on that side. Next question I would like to ask to Vasily Kulinari. Thank you for coming. What is the state of play of offshore wind in Europe? as it stands and what needs to be planned carefully at the national level? And before answering the question, I would like to also ask you to introduce yourself shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Fuk, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Vasiliki Klonari. I'm representing Wind Europe. For the ones that don't know Wind Europe, we are the trade association of wind energy in Europe. I have some slides to show, so I'm not sure. Yeah, they're already there. Can I have the... Thank you. So, yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's very nice to be here, and especially it's very nice to be in Istanbul today. So today, Europe has 32 gigawatts of offshore wind farms, offshore wind capacity in operation. This covers 3% of the electricity demand. In this map, you can see the installed capacities in gigawatts per country with the blue bars. And then with the red bars, you can see the share of the electricity demand that the energy generated with these wind farms covered in each country. So in terms of installed capacity, first is the United Kingdom in Europe with 15 gigawatts, then Germany with 8 gigawatts, and then the Netherlands with 4 gigawatts. Today we have 129 offshore wind farms connected to the grid. But governments have set targets for 150 gigawatts by 2030. We expect 120 of these gigawatts to be installed in the North Sea and in the Celtic Sea and in the Sea of Ireland, and 19.6 of these to be installed in the Baltic Sea. And as it stands, we are installing 3 gigawatts per year. However, to reach these targets, Europe needs to reach 20 gigawatts per year by the end of this decade. There are many factors that can slow down this pace. In 2023, the first semester of 2023, we had 42% of the expected offshore wind capacity installed in Europe. And in 2022, not a single commercial offshore wind farm reached a final investment decision. In 2023, we have 5 or 6 offshore wind farms that have already reached final investment decision. There are reasons that actually can slow down these decisions for investors, and it's extremely important to mention this, as Alvin mentioned before, the importance of international finance for Turkey. There are reasons such as inflation, geopolitics, or wide-ranging interventions in electricity markets that have really slowed down decisions, because investment decisions, because investors were concerned that price negotiations became much more difficult due to supply chain issues, and of course the cost of capital increased. There are some factors, some elements that need to be planned very carefully by governments when setting their targets, and it's never too early to plan for this. So first of all, it's really important that governments set binding targets specifically for offshore wind energy in their climate and energy plans, for instance. This will allow reserving space and grid capacity, which is extremely important that these two elements are reserved in a binding manner. Also, it's very important to have a clear targets and a very specific schedule for auctions with very clear volumes and very clear milestones, so really the schedule of when the volumes will be tendered, and then a very clear design since the very beginning, because this brings certainty not only to project developers and investors, but also to investments for long-term investments in the supply chain. This is really vital for making sure that we really keep the pace and we reach the targets as foreseen. Then, of course, permitting. Governments really need to take action to simplify and speed up the processes. And this includes also securing the right resources, so human resources and digital resources, and making sure that the skills are being developed in the countries. So in my next slides, I have some examples from different countries with good practices for these elements that I mentioned. For the first one is about reserving space and grid. We have the example of Scotland, where Scotland has in its National Energy and Climate Plan reserved maritime space separately for bottom fixed offshore wind and for floating offshore winds. A second example is for permitting. So we have very good practice is the example of the Netherlands, where of course we have a single point of contact for all the administrative process and a very efficient process with strict deadlines for the different steps of the process. A third example is from France, and this is about the very detailed schedule for the auctions and the volumes that are being tendered. A fourth example concerns the economic viability of the project, so revenue stabilization, and the example comes from the UK, where we have separate pots of money for the revenue of stabilization of already established technologies, emerging technologies. And then what I mentioned before, the planning since the very beginning of the supply chain, which is vital. So already with the targets, the countries need to start looking into how the right supply chain will be reinforced and how it will be reinforced and be in place for when it will be needed. And this example here shows the case where investments have been specifically made, funds have been specifically targeted for port infrastructure. So these are the main points that I would like to highlight for your question.
Thank you very much, Vasiliki. Another good example I might add is Greece. Like a month or 2 months ago, I was in a workshop, and I saw that Greece is planning to invest on the transmission lines to connect all the islands. And this is a very good example for offshore wind investments, because then you are reducing the investment that the investors have to put for the grid connection, which is a significant amount. And if Greece can plan the port infrastructure well, we might see the lowest LCOEs in the market in Greece. So there are many more good examples. Now I would like to turn to an investor, Michael Fischer. He's from ENBV. Again, please introduce yourself after my question. The media lately reported that the viability of some offshore wind projects is threatened, like the ones in the US. Why do you think is that? Why this is happening?
Yeah, thanks for the question. My name is Michael Fischer. I'm with ENBW, which is a German integrated utility. We are developing, building, and we are operating offshore wind projects. At the moment, we have a fleet of 1 gigawatts in operation. 1 gigawatt is currently in construction, and we have 6 gigawatts in our development pipeline. Could I get the... Thank you. And regarding to your question, so indeed, we are seeing at the moment certain projects which struggle, which are which are at the moment on hold. The reason for that is we experienced a very high inflation on the supply chain, so costs have risen. We have also a shortage on the supply chain itself, and for that reason, these projects are currently negatively affected and are indeed threatened. Offshore wind is also characterized by a very large amount of commodities which are involved. And we saw, for example, on the steel prices, like an increase, like an immense increase in the last 2 years, 21, 22. And that equates about 70% of the turbine materials. And for that reason, what we saw now between 21, 22, we saw an increase of around 40% of the prices. On the other hand, the supply chain itself, it's also a very concentrated market. So we have not many companies providing the supplies. For example, if we take the WTG, so at the moment in Europe, we can choose from 3 different suppliers. So therefore, we have a market where there is limited supply. What we also just saw on the other slides, the countries, they are having very ambitious targets. So let's say to bring it to net zero will even increase, and there's a quite high pressure on the supply chain. When we look at offshore wind, why are these companies struggling? The reason for that is that the companies, they secured their offtake already during a period where we had low interest rates, where we had low inflation. And we saw the example of the CFD in round 4 in the UK. So we have basically a gap between the time of the investment when, for example, the work packages are locked in, and in advance some regulation require that the offtake is already secured. And this is exactly what happened. On the other hand, it is not only affecting the renewables energy markets or offshore wind in particular, but what we see, we have pretty long lead times in this technology. So in this slide, you also see the different phases of the projects, and compared to, for example, wind onshore or solar, we have significantly longer times, and we need to avoid or implement certain measures which were already stated, for example, on the CFDs in order to mitigate these. On the other hand, we also see a very high improvement in technology. What this slide is stipulating is basically what kind of technology our company has up to now invested. And you see more than 10 years ago, for example, there was basically like an onshore turbine built on a small offshore wind farm. So Baltic 1 in the Baltic Sea with the total capacity of 50 megawatts and a 2.3 megawatts turbine. And within a very short time, gradually this increased a lot. So we are now with this project He Dreiht, which is currently under investment. So we are in a total capacity of 1 gigawatts for the entire project, and the turbine capacity increased to 15 megawatts. So again, we see with this slide also what you have mentioned before, the decrease in the total cost to build such projects. They can be more efficient. We can also factor in synergies, and this is going into the right direction in order to also build out scalable projects. What you can also see from these dimensions, then of course other points needs to be considered. So, for example, the logistics could be a challenge if we talk about, let's say, like just a blade, which is more than 130 meters long. Same goes for the environmental impact. So when we are piling such huge structures and monopiles, we also need to make sure that noise emission is within the boundaries. And so it goes into a good direction, but again, there are some challenges ahead.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, so today we were also talking with Giles. I was wondering why the first wind farm, offshore wind farm in Italy, used Mingyang Chinese wind turbines, and the reason is because the regulators doesn't allow any change of the wind turbine type or the capacity rated power, and the project developments are taking so long, and when the time comes to install the wind turbines, you can no longer find that technology in the market. That's why it is very important, actually, to be flexible. We have to manage or convince the governments to be flexible on the capacities, rated powers of the turbines. My next question will be to Jan de Vries. And we thank you for coming. He's from Baldas-Nedam, and he's going to provide us some information regarding the things that we need to be careful while planning the wind farms from the construction perspective.
Thank you for your introduction. Indeed, I'm working for Baldas-Nedam, a Dutch construction company. We are building offshore wind farms already since 1993. So we were one of the first in the Netherlands in the lake. That one is already being decommissioned a few years ago. And I think at the end we installed more than 600 monopiles in the North Sea. And we are, since 2016, part of the Renaissance Group. So that's also the reason why we're bringing some offshore experience to this Dutch construction company. I have some movies on the screen to keep you guys awake and not to have something. So please start the first one. So I think everybody's awake again. No, I thought it was good to have these two movies first, because I can tell a lot and I can and go through the slides how an offshore wind farm is being built. But this gives in a nutshell, I think, a good impression how a construction of an offshore wind farm is being built. The first movie was not typical offshore wind farm. It was near shore. We were building a monopile construction on the beach. And that's also the beginning of my story. It always begins with the permitting, and that was already earlier explained. Permitting is key. So what is in the permit, where we are allowed, and that's in Western Europe quite strict. So we are allowed to build at a certain place, at a certain spot, and that's where we have to do it. Then the next step in that whole phasing is, what will the design be? So in the offshore movie, you saw the typical monopile and transition piece solution. But in the first part, you saw a monopile and a concrete foundation. Both designs fitted the best for the project and the best for that location. So the design at the beginning is quite critical. What is the best solution for your wind farm? And offshore it can be a typical monopile. It can be gravity-based. It can be a jacket solution. It's depending on soil conditions, depending on requirements, depending on the turbine. So a lot of things can determine the design of your structure. And I think if you reflect that to Turkey, the soil conditions are quite rocky or quite stiff. So then the question is then the monopile the right solution, or do we have to look into other solutions that support the wind turbines that needs to be offshore in Turkey? Second step next to the design is how to produce it. And you saw in the second movie the fabrication of monopiles. What has been said, fabrication in western part of Europe is quite common. We have 3-4 fabricators that can produce this in a quite good and qualitative way. I've been in Turkey on visit to several factories. I think there's possibility to make it, but also the construction industry on concrete, but also jacket building can be established in Turkey to build this kind of structures locally and being established in Turkey for Turkish waters. Next step after production is that you have some sort of yard where you can have all facilities, where you can have the structures, have the turbines to be located from the shore towards the sea, because everything needs to be pre-assembled, needs to be handled before it goes offshore. So I think all participants already explained port infrastructure is quite a key thing. You need to have the big vessels in, because with the growing demand or the bigger getting turbines, the vessels are getting bigger, foundation structures are getting heavier due to the bigger turbines. So vessels are a sort of key how to install and how to construct at the sea. Next to that, also of course, wave soil conditions determine what kind of vessel, what kind of type of structure you need to install. Then I think the main part everybody's looking for, then we are going to install offshore. And with offshore, you have a big vessel. It can be with a jackup, it can be with the floating asset to install the support structure. Next to the support structure, the cable will be brought in with separate vessels. So from most likely the substation or from shore, it's depending on how the grid is being established. And then in between the structures, the inter-array cable is being installed. After that, the turbine will be put on top by, most of the time, a big jackup at the moment. If you're talking about 50 to 20 megawatt turbines, you're talking about a new generation of jackups. And with the jackups, the turbine is being installed, and you talk about a hub height of around, or a nacelle height of 150 meters. So they are quite big, quite soft to handle. Then it needs to be commissioned. Then a lot of crew transfer vessels come into the fields with technicians. They are being brought towards the wind farm structures, and they are being, so to say, putting the threads together that the turbine can produce the power and bring it to shore. So that's, I think, in a nutshell, how the construction goes. And I think the reflection is, when you look to Turkey, when I said to the foundation part, I think things can be handled in Turkey with foundations. I think we learned already today, and I think we know that on turbine components, there's a big market and a big production facility in Turkey already, but it's more for the onshore. So how convert that to the offshore turbine parts? Cable is same like monopole production, quite specific. So you have in Greece, Prysmian, you have some other places, but they are more not around the corner. But that are all specific products to be utilized for this kind of wind farms. And then, yeah, it's at the end, it's a lot of hands and persons to help and to support the whole process. And that's, I think, at the end, something to be established. It needs time. And I think what we also learned on Michael's speech, you have to pre-construction 2 to 4 years and construction. And I also digged into that the last week to see, okay, where are we talking about if Turkey wants to have 5 gigawatt in 2035? When do we need to start? Because aiming on 1 gigawatt per year, I had to look at the Dogger Bank wind farm and the Hollandse Kust wind farm. It took them to install 1.5 gigawatts 4 years after the tender was won. It took them 4 years to install and fully commission all the 140 turbines at the site. So that's a bit the numbering. It takes more or less 4 years. So yeah, you need to start somewhere at 25 with your first installation works and construction works to be able to reach the 5 gigawatts in 2035.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You brought your supporters, huh? Yeah, but it's a very good point because a few months ago, NREL issued a report about the design or the plan roadmap for the supply chain, development of the supply chain in the US. And one of the concerns was there was only 6 heavy lifters worldwide. And with the increasing demand on offshore, it will be very difficult to find vessels to install the foundations for fixed bottom. So my next question is for my Turkish professor, Dr. Yücel Acar. He's from DEHUKAM. DEHUKAM he will explain it, but DEHUKAM is a think tank focused on the maritime law. And in this region, we are surrounded with like Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean, which is a topic of many conflicts. That's why we also need to be very careful and thoughtful about the steps that we take while developing offshore wind energy. So, Professor, please first introduce yourself and then the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ufuk. As you say, I come from DEHUKAM, which is a state think tank institution working mainly on maritime law, not specifically on wind turbines, but, you know, constructing wind turbines on the sea have some legal aspects. So I'm here to clarify what are the legal aspects of constructing wind turbines on sea rather than on land, because we are working on maritime law rather than land law. As we all know that sea maritime areas have been used for more purposes than in the past, especially within last 50 years. Maritime spaces are now used more and more for energy purposes. It started, you know, rather focusing on hydrocarbon resources like petroleum or natural gas after the Second World War, but now we are in, I think, a second stage of using maritime spaces for energy purposes. It's now renewable sources of energy rather than hydrocarbon resources. So that's why, you know, there are new legal aspects of dealing with this new energy sources on the maritime law. Recently, states are mostly working on the concept called maritime spatial planning. And that means states are now trying to plan the maritime areas for the purpose of protection of environment or ecological purposes and economic purposes and social purposes. So the maritime areas are needed to be planned quite carefully if you are intending to use the maritime spaces more effectively, simply because there are many activities now on the maritime spaces. So that's why states need to plan everything to get more benefit and use more beneficially the maritime areas. These are all issues of international law simply because international law regulates the rights and responsibilities of states on maritime spaces. Before conducting any activities on maritime spaces, we should know what are the rights of states on maritime spaces and in which part of the maritime space you are entitled to conduct activities and to what limit. International law divides the maritime areas into different sections. Legally speaking, there are more than one maritime spaces, and every single of them is different from each other in legal purposes. You see that, unfortunately, there are some Turkish expressions, and I think it's no problem for our foreign guests. You know, if you look at the maps, the dark blue represents the internal waters. So the waters that are enclaved into the land, and also territorial waters in the middle of the maps. And territorial waters and internal waters are all parts of the state territory. That means coastal state has full and exclusive jurisdiction over internal waters and territorial waters. So that means if you are doing any activities in the internal and territorial waters, like constructing wind turbines, you are all at the mercy of coastal state. You know, you need to adjust yourself to regulations fully of the coastal state if you are conducting this in internal waters and territorial waters. So let's go to another map, which is going to be English this time, I think. That's the one. I think it's quite sufficient to understand the maritime spaces. But beyond the territorial waters, we go to a completely different maritime space, which is called continental shelf and exclusive economic zone. Continental shelf seems to be quite unrelated to wind turbine activities, but in certain aspects, they are still seems to be related, simply because, as far as I know, technically, my colleagues know better than me that I think you need to touch down on the surface of the sea to construct a wind turbine. So you touch down. So when you touch down the continental shelf, you should be aware that you are touching down the continental shelf of a coastal state. So that means you might be, you know, in a position to know what are the regulations of that coastal state concerning the continental shelf. So that's the first aspect. But if we are talking about the exclusive economic zone, which is covering the water space as well and the air space over the continental shelf, and the exclusive economic zone could be declared up to 200 miles from the shore, so you are able to do such activities only with the permission of coastal state, if there is a declaration of exclusive economic zone by the coastal state. So if you are planning to construct a wind turbine on a maritime space beyond territorial waters of a coastal state, and if there is a declaration of exclusive economic zone, that means you are not entitled to do this without the permission of coastal state. It is almost the same as the territorial waters. If there is a declaration of exclusive economic zone, and if you are dealing with the energy resources of that area. So, declaration of exclusive economic zone is quite significant. What if there is no declaration of exclusive economic zone? So that means you are in the high seas. So on the high seas, every single country is entitled to construct the artificial installations like wind turbines without the permission of any country. So high seas are open to be used by every single state freely. The only restriction could be concerning the maritime navigation. As far as you are not constructing them on the very significant routes of international navigation, then there is no problem. Environmental considerations is another thing, and you need not to damage the environment when you are doing these activities. Let me also clarify Turkey's position concerning the maritime spaces around our country. In the Black Sea, we have a declared exclusive economic zone, and the boundaries have been drawn between neighboring countries, and there is no potential problem areas in the Black Sea. As you all know, Turkey has been conducting the exploration activities and exploitation activities of natural gas in the Black Sea, but it's also open to wind turbine constructions in the Black Sea. I'm not sure whether it's really suitable place concerning the potential of the wind turbines. But when we come to the agency, we know that it has a very great potential concerning the wind turbines, but there are many problems. No country, Greece and Turkey, did not declare exclusive economic zone. That means we have high seas beyond territorial waters, but the area is so sensitive that no country, Greece or Turkey, did not do any such activities or declaration of areas for the construction of wind turbines beyond territorial waters. We know that Turkey and Greece has been doing such activities only in the territorial waters of these two countries. We don't know, maybe there would be some activities beyond territorial waters in the future, but there is a great potential of conflict between two countries because there are some rocks, small islands which are under the dispute concerning the sovereignty. In the Eastern Mediterranean, again, we have a very problematic issues because we have not been able to establish our boundaries concerning the continental shelf. Luckily, there is no declaration of exclusive economic zone in the Eastern Mediterranean, but we know that some countries have declared the exclusive economic zone, but these are disputed maritime areas concerning the Turkish position. So that means it's not really suitable places at the moment to do such activities. You may face some restrictions, just like the petroleum companies are facing such problems in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. I think that's enough for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. So we have like 30 minutes left, so I'm kindly asking you to shorten the second part of the speeches. I will change the order now and continue with Vasily. You mentioned that the major factors that need special attention. Do you have further recommendations for the design and implementation?
Yes, thank you. So actually I had some slides, but since we do not have so much time, maybe you can just, yeah.
7 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I mentioned before about the auctions and the design of the auctions. So it's in this case, the main vehicle for planning the auctions should be the centralized tender approach, because this actually allows to consider as many parameters as possible, all in a holistic manner, so all together since the beginning, and it provides much better certainty for investors, but also for the investments in the supply chain. So, for instance, I mentioned before the Netherlands and Germany are applying this approach. You mentioned before the case of Greece. So indeed, last week, Greece published a plan for offshore wind, a more detailed plan for offshore wind. They have identified the areas, and they have something very good that they did is that they already in this plan they reserve grid capacity for the offshore wind farms that will come. So I'm not sure how is the system in Turkey, but in most European countries, grid connection is granted with a first-come, first-serve approach. So whoever comes first in the queue for having requested to be connected to the grid has priority over the next ones. Now, this can be a problem for offshore because, as it was mentioned, permitting and in general consenting can take too much time. In the meantime, if the country has only identified the connection points to the onshore grid without having them reserved in a binding way, other assets can ask to be connected to these onshore grid points, and this can become a major issue for the offshore plan, both for the connection of the wind farms, but also for the anticipation of the supply chain for the grid equipment, for instance, for HVDC equipment for connecting the offshore wind farms. And you mentioned before that some countries already have the infrastructure, for instance, the ports. You mentioned, again, Greece as an example, but still, the infrastructure might be there, but this needs to be upgraded and needs to be adjusted for offshore wind. So all these parameters need to be considered since the beginning as part of the design of a centralized model for the tenders. There is, of course, also the more decentralized model for the tenders, or the open door system, where the developer can, for instance, choose the sites that are suitable for the offshore assets. In this case, this is a suitable model specifically for development of offshore hydrogen production, specifically when it's also off-grid, and it doesn't mingle with the rest of the process with the connection to the grid. Another element that is very important is the use of the procurement of equipment. So both for the wind farms, but also for their grid integration. This is today, especially for grid integration, is a huge bottleneck in Europe. There are very few suppliers of technology to integrate the wind farms, which are already overbooked for a long time. So what really is important in this case is to have a minimum number of products that are being procured for grid connection, standardized, and that already comply with grid connection and European security criteria, for instance, cybersecurity criteria. And the last point that I wanted to mention regarding the design of the auctions, so governments should not be awarding projects only based on the highest financial offer, but it's really important to consider also non-price criteria that can bring certainty not only to the project developers but also to the investors in the supply chain, but also, of course, societal benefits in general for citizens.
Thank you. You mentioned that few suppliers are already overbooked. What could be the reason, like very shortly, what could be the reason why they are not investing on increasing their capacity? Could that be the lack of goals for the 2050, like future long-term plans?
Yeah, one reason is indeed that there are not very clear targets in all countries specifically for offshore. So this is really important to have long-term binding targets for the capacities that are going to be installed. Of course, they're also in a global market, so if other markets out of Europe are providing more certainty, they might choose to invest more in these markets. Another reason that I mentioned before is that, especially for grid connection, that we have too many customized solutions now procured in the different countries. So it's very difficult for them to decide on which really products to invest and start new lines for these products if they don't know which will be the default solutions to be procured in the future. So this is why it's so important since the beginning to really think about these elements.
Okay, thank you. I would like to again come to Michael Fischer. So what are the potential measures to establish and support a healthy investment environment for offshore wind? This is very important for us right now.
Can I get the clicker? Yeah, thank you. Some of the points have been mentioned indeed, which could be suggestions to establish like a healthy investment environment. So for example, auctions have been mentioned a couple of times. Indeed, we saw different types of auctions, United States, UK, Germany. These are very high components of the monetary factors. On the other hand, some of the projects or some of the countries award then the offtake in a second auction. So there is a certain gap in between. Some of the costs for the seabed, for example, they are naturally increasing the LCOE. Then on the other hand, there's an implication on the CFD or on the PPA. I think these needs to be synchronized and streamlined in a certain way. Also, with regards to the cost development, we heard already certain situations that we faced in the past. So such CFDs or feed-in tariffs, there should be a component which is mitigating and protecting from cost increases for these various periods during the development of the project. On the other hand, it's also crucial that we have long-term planning so that there are targets and that there are timelines for the upcoming auctions so that also investors have clarity, and the same goes for the supply chain. So in order to basically scale up the supply chain with the demand, it needs to be clear what kind of projects will be awarded, what sizes, and for that reason all these measures also go hand in hand. And if on the other hand we come back to a more stable cost environment, of course this will also certainly help in order to create again such an investment environment. And last but not least, also the governmental collaboration so that the rules are clear, that these are predictable, that we have a clear and transparent regulation. So in order that there is also investments and investors who are going to invest then into this technology.
Thank you very much. So Alcım, you provided us the details, but as a conclusion, what suggestions do you have for Turkey regarding offshore wind auction design?
Okay, so through all these international experiences and also through the stakeholder meetings, these were with international stakeholders and also local stakeholders, investors in Turkey as well. So we came up with some suggestions for Turkey's offshore auction design. So the first one is that the MET ocean analysis, seabed surveys, the preliminary environmental impact assessment should be provided by the authorities, by the administration. This is the first offshore auction of Turkey, so it will be good to attract investors by reducing investor risks and to receive also realistic bids. This is our first suggestion. And secondly, especially for Turkey, it is really important to determine that the investors, the applicants, have the adequate technical and financial capabilities. This was a major problem in the past auctions for onshore wind in Turkey, so it's even more important for offshore auctions, in our opinion. So there can be some pre-qualification criteria, financially, technically, maybe socially and environmentally, or there can be multi-criteria auction. So here our suggestion is that price should not be the only criteria to select the investors to assign these capacities. Apart from this, considering different geographical conditions in Turkey's seas, we think it's important to choose a technology and region-specific tender approach. And it is critical that the projects are designed and implemented with attention to environmental and social compliance, to access international finance and to access ECA loans. And another very important issue for Turkey is defining PPA prices, defining the ceiling price and the indexation mechanisms, because we are experiencing very high inflation rates. We are experiencing very high increases in the exchange rates. So there can be different options actually for this. One option is to have the PPA price in hard currencies like euro and dollars. It can also be in the Turkish lira, but in such case, it will be important to apply a foreign currency-based escalation formula, or to set a floor price, a minimum foreign exchange-based floor price for price protection. Again, defining the ceiling price is very important, and it's important. All the participants here talked about recent cost increases in the region. So it will be important to define the ceiling price in line with the up-to-date offshore costs. And finally, PPA prices should also be index escalated by taking into account not only the inflation rate, but also the commodity prices. In terms of local content, so we have actually success story, let's say, for the onshore wind and for the solar industry in Turkey. So thanks to the incentives given in the past, local content incentive and some obligations later on through auctions, now we have a local industry for onshore wind and for solar. So this can also be implemented for the offshore wind, but we have to remember, of course, that this also increases the costs of financing, especially. So the stakeholder interviews that we are having, actually, the expectation is that if there will be a local content requirement, the mandatory local content rate in the beginning should allow the investors to reach ECA financing. Maybe it can be increased, this rate can be increased step by step later on. And another important issue is that, of course, the capacity, sufficient capacity, should be allocated regularly, and here a roadmap to allocate this capacity, a calendar, will be very important for Turkey as well. In terms of grid connections, there are different applications in the world. In some countries, this is undertaken by the system operators. So this is reducing the risk of investors, increasing the participation rate in the tender, and reducing the PPA prices. But it is important. It's very important, actually, to guarantee that the grid connection and the construction of the wind farm are going simultaneously. So if one of them is late, there will be significant losses. If the private sector overtakes this burden, let's say, or this task, this coordination risk is eliminated. But in this case, if this will be given to the investors, again, pre-qualification criteria will be very important, because the number of companies which can actually make these grid connections is limited in Turkey. So selection of the right investors will be very important in this case. Other criteria is that, so bidding period should be sufficient for the investors to have their preparations. PPA periods should be long and stable. So the international experiences on average is around 20 years. So for Turkey, we suggest a PPA period between 15 to 20 years at least. Permit processes should be standardized, and the coordination of these permit periods from a single authority will be very helpful, because we heard about the international experiences. If these processes are too long, then we have problems, and the technology is outdated and not cost effective anymore. So permitting periods will be very important. And finally, penalties are very, very important in the Turkish case as well. So these should be designed carefully, and these should be implemented effectively, so that the realization rates can increase.
Thank you very much, Alkım. So my last question will be to Jan. I kept you as the last on purpose to keep your supporters in the room. So yes, I don't know if you have looked into our existing infrastructure, but how do you think that we should organize an offshore wind farm construction in Turkey, or if we can right now?
That's indeed an interesting challenge, I think, that we are facing in Turkey. And also just said, it's pending, I think, on regulation. So how will local content being determined in the regulation? How strict will it be? And is indeed the onshore set of requirements as a good practice in Turkey applicable to offshore wind? And I think that should be the discussion. We want, in Turkey, we would like to have a new offshore wind market. We would like, I think, to learn from the experience from the Western, what's happened and the faults that's being made there. So don't make them again. I think that's the message we would like to say. And then indeed how to collaborate with local companies to support the international companies with experience as a sort of joint effort into this market. And I think what's normally then happening when the market grows, from nature, the local content will come and will be created due to the O&M work that needs to be done on the wind farm, and other works that will be commenced. And I think Turkish companies can then see and can invest in material and equipment and fabrication facilities to be in that game, so to say. But I think the big question is there a pipeline, is there commitment, is there indeed good regulation to be dealt with by the local companies, and should that be driven by local content? I think that's the big question. It's something different than onshore wind, offshore wind. I think that we also should be seen, and that's I think how we would like to approach it.
Than I've expected. So, is there any questions for our speakers from the room?
First of all, thank you for Alkım Hanım, then Mr. Can, for their good studying regarding the Turkish offshore wind industry. I already read Alkım Hanım's report, and I can easily understand all of her written, just with some small adding due to the last closing page, which their proposal, such a VAT exclusion can be. Other than also, special thanks to Mr. Can. He already explained the Turkish offshore conditions, such as rocky and stiff bottom, and he already also explained some method how Turkish and wind industry solve that without depend of the huge new generation jack-up vessels. Thank you again for your proposal. Even I can understand that this is the one proposal to keep Turkish offshore wind construction industry in the table. We will not be depend to the fully to the foreign industry, marine industry in these cases. Also, he already said that there is one solution that fixed bottom construction and Turkish companies can be easily done this one. These two people already explained their very good solution regarding that. For that reason, I am their supporter. Even I am the one of the competitor of the Mr. Jan. But Alkım's report is clear for other things. Other ladies and gentlemen, I already thanks that, and even I am following them since from the 2014. But just their professors' concerns, it's not sweet for the Turkish waters because we are the high speedily deepening bathymetry. Therefore, we should be in the continental shelf because after the 50 or 60 meter, it's not feasible to us to invest as a fixed bottom, and we are going to the floating case while we are already questioning to the offshore wind pricing condition, which is the 2.5 times expensive than the onshore wind. Floating cases is double of the fixed bottom if you compare with even monopiles. As I already Mr. John explained that monopiles not suit to the Turkish waters mostly in the effective wind areas. Therefore, I'm already thanking to you. And I am not a supporter, I am being supported for here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I didn't get the question, but... Okay, thank you.
Ben sorumu Türkçe soracağım. Yücel Acar Hocam.
I will ask the question in Turkish, and I would like to thank Mr. Yücel Acar for the information that you have given. We know Turkey's continental shelf, but the exclusive zones are not clear. When will they be clarified, or is there a study about this? Because we don't, up until now, we talked about this with Mr. Cihat Yaycın, and where is this, and why is this not announced, the exclusive economic zone?
The question, so I'm going to translate it, yeah? Are you? Okay, the question is that, why there is no declaration of exclusive economic zone in the agency and in Eastern Mediterranean Sea, despite the fact that, we don't have clear boundaries of EEZ. Maybe we have some idea of Turkey's boundaries concerning the continental spot. How about the exclusive economic zone? Yeah, there is a huge discussion in Turkey whether Turkey should declare exclusive economic zone in the agency and in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. I think that's my perception, not really, proven information that Turkey's government is hesitant in declaring EEZ in the both maritime areas. Basically because we don't need to have more disputes, daily disputes. It's quite different from having continental shelf. If you declare EEZ, that means you need to protect fisheries and investments like wind turbines and similar activities. So that means every day Turkey's maybe maritime forces are patrolling on the area just to prevent any other foreign ships entering for fisheries or for other purposes. So that means almost every day you have a potential to conflict with other countries, especially with Greece. I think that's my perception, that Turkey does not want to have more, quarrels or disputes, daily disputes with other countries, because already we have some serious issues in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have frozen the dispute in the Eastern Aegean Sea. There's no problem, actual problem, but in the Eastern Mediterranean we have great potential conflicts with other countries. That's my perception. I'm not sure. That's my perception about Turkish government's attitude. Okay.
Any more questions? Okay, so I want to wrap it up with the notes I took from the session. I see that it's important to plan, like maritime special planning is very important, as well as the measurements that needs to be conducted both for the meteorological measurements and geotechnical studies. We need to have clear targets long-term for 2050 at least, and also short-term project development durations if we want the infrastructure investments. And the capacity allocation mechanisms that does not exclusively relies on price. That's my take from this session. So thank you very much for our guests that has traveled from far. For us, thanks a lot, and thank you very much for listening. Teşekkür ederiz.